Hello dear students, my name is Vikram Nallavade. I am from the Department of Mechanical Engineering. I am working at SIT-COE, Yadra, Ichilkanji. In today's lecture of Automobile Engineering, we will discuss unit number 3, that is the transmission system, and in which we will cover clutches. We will discuss its needs and the types. So let's discuss the basic things about the clutches. So here, as it is mentioned, you just observe the mechanism which is in process. Clutch is a part, it is like a disc that is kept in between flywheel and the gearbox. So clutch is used to engage and disengage the engine with the transmission system of an automobile. In similar manner, it is like this. So let's discuss various points of clutches. As we all know that clutch is a device which carries power from the engine to drive wheel through the shafts. It is located between flywheel and the gearbox that we have discussed here. This is the intermediate part of flywheel and the gearbox. Then a clutch is a mechanism which enables the rotary motion of one shaft to be transmitted at will to second shaft, whose axis is coincident with that of first. Clutch is located between engine and the gearbox. When the clutch is engaged, the power flows from the engine to the rear wheels through the transmission system and the vehicle moves. When the clutch is disengaged, the power is now transmitted to the rear wheels and the vehicle stops while the engine is still running. When clutch is disengaged, it is when during the starting the engine, during the shifting of the gears, and during when the engine is in idle condition. Only during these three conditions clutch is disengaged from the flywheel or engine side and to the transmission system. Clutch is engaged only when the vehicle is to move and is kept engaged when the vehicle is moving. Now, in next slide we will discuss various important requirements of the clutch. So let's discuss it one by one. First is it should be able to transmit maximum torque of the engine. Then it should engage gradually to avoid the sudden jerks. It should be able to dissipate large amount of heat generated during the clutch operation. Now heat is generated because clutch comes in contact with other rotating parts of an engine. It should be dynamically balanced, particularly in case of high-speed engine clutches. It should have suitable mechanism to damp vibrations, it is very important, and to eliminate the noise produced during power transmission. It should be as small as possible so that it will occupy minimum space. It should be easy to operate, requiring as little exertion as possible on the part of the driver. Means we have to work on minimizing the exertion on the part of the driver. It should be made as light as possible so that it will continue to rotate for any length of time after the clutch has been disengaged. Then the next requirement is it must be trouble free and have longer life, and it must be easy to inspect, adjust and repair. So all these points are very important which are required from the clutch. Now let us discuss what are the principles of the clutches. Generally, the principle of clutch is explained by the diagram here. So you just observe this part is flywheel on the left side, and right side it is the pressure plate. So in between flywheel and pressure plate, the clutch plate or clutch disc is mounted. The clutch principle is based on friction. Hence, when clutch plate comes in contact with the flywheel by pressure plate, then engagement in between the transmission system and engine takes place. The clutch principle is based on friction. When two friction surfaces are brought in contact with each other and pressed, they are united due to friction between them. If one is revolved, the other will also revolve. This is the basic principle. The friction between the two surfaces depends upon it is the area of surface, then what amount of pressure is applied upon them, and the coefficient of friction of the surface materials. One surface is considered as a driving member and the other member is driven member. So let's discuss about the functions as we are talking about. You just observe the diagram here, which how does it demonstrate. This part is engine part. These are the cylinders producing powers, and this shaft which transmit the power to the transmission system. Here this is the clutch mechanism that we have discussed. So how does it revolve and transmit the power? We'll focus on it. See, when the clutch pedal is applied, then the pressure is applied through the pressure plates onto the clutches, and that directly is engaged with the flywheel which is connected with the rotary part. So the functions of clutches, it is to permit engagement or disengagement of gear when the vehicle is stationary and engine is running. Then second function, to transmit the engine power to the road wheels smoothly without shock to transmission system while setting the wheel in motion, and to permit the engaging of the gears when the vehicle is in motion without damaging the gear wheels. So from this image it is clear that how clutches are functioning. Means how pedal is operated, then when the pressure plate moves away from the clutch plate, the power from the engine gets engaged, disconnected. Now about clutch classification, there are the two types of clutches. One is positive clutches and second is the friction clutches. In positive clutches there are square jaw clutch and spiral jaw clutch, but there are number of ranges of Friction clutches like cone clutch, centrifugal clutch, dry clutch, magnetic current clutches, eddy current clutches, plate clutch. Now in plate clutch there is a single plate clutch and a multi plate clutch. So we will discuss number of types of clutches from this classification. So to show you one video is here so that we can be clear about various types of clutches from the classification. See, there are types of friction clutches. You see, we have already discussed that is in intermediate part of pressure plate and the flywheel. So what are the functions of clutch that we have discussed? It's engaging and disengaging and different types. So let's classify automobile clutches, friction clutches and fluid flywheel. So in this friction clutches, these work on the principle that when a rotating disc comes in contact with the stationary disc, the stationary disc start rotating because of friction between. In this lecture, we will discuss types of friction clutches. As we all know, clutch can be defined as a mechanical device when engaged transmits power from one shaft to the other coaxial shaft. So we all know that clutch is the intermediate part in between the transmission system and the flywheel, and that flywheel is connected with the shaft, rotating shaft, which is connected in the engine part. So it receives the motion or power from engine and transmits to the transmission system. So clutch is the part which it engages and disengages both the mechanism in between the flywheel and the pressure plate. So you see the mechanism, how does it operate. Then what are the functions of clutches that we have already covered, but let's discuss. Its functions are to engage and disengage the gearbox with the engine, then transmitting the engine power to road wheels smoothly. uh, Next function is to allow the gear change without any damage. Now let's discuss some of the classification of automobile clutches. One is friction clutch and second is flywheel clutch. So to discuss about friction clutches, that we have already covered, but it works on the principle that when a rotating disc comes in contact with the stationary disc, the stationary disc starts rotating because of the friction between them. So here in between friction plates, which forces friction is generated when it is connected with the flywheel as well as the pressure plate. So next is the fluid flywheel. So fluid flywheel is it works on the principle of transfer of motion between two members by means of fluid. So this is the basic difference between friction clutches as well as fluid flywheel, that friction is friction forces are applied on the clutches in friction clutches. On the other side, in fluid flywheel, fluid is responsible in the case of power transmission for engaging and disengaging in the fluid flywheel. We'll classify automobile clutches in terms of friction clutches, cone clutch, single plate clutch, multiplate clutch, semi-centrifugal clutch, and the centrifugal clutch. Let's start with the cone clutch. You see the mechanism. Now, in case of cone clutch, that is shown in the simplified diagram. In this type, the contact surfaces are in the form of cones, as shown in the figures, which is in this green color, that is cone shaped clutch plate. On the left side, it is inner cone shaped flywheel. On the extreme left side, the shaft is driving shaft. On the green part of the cone shaped clutch plate, these are the friction linings, and the right side is the driven shaft which gets power from the driving shaft via cone clutch. In similar manner, it is mentioned in this picture also. So in the engaged position, the male cone is fully inside the female cone, so that the friction surfaces are in complete contact. This is done by means of springs which keep the male cone pressed all the time. When the clutch is engaged, the torque is transmitted from the engaged engine via the flywheel and the male cone to the spline gearbox shaft. For disengaging the clutch, the male cone is pulled out by the means of the lever system operated through the clutch pedal, thereby separating the contact surfaces. So you observe the mechanism in between. The only advantage of cone clutch is that normal force acting on the contact surface in this case is larger than the axial force, as compared to the simple single plate clutch in which normal force acting on the contact surfaces is equal to the axial force. So how clutches are engaged and disengaged, these are shown. Now next is the single plate clutch mechanism. Now you observe what happens. These are the friction linings. Here two annular friction surfaces. Over flywheel is mounted. These are the spines, the portion free to slide. This is the driven shaft and the coil spring. How axial force is applied through the pedal. This is the clutch pedal. This is the mechanism, how engagement and disengagement takes place. A modified single plate clutch, that is known as diaphragm spring type single plate clutch. This is the diaphragm spring. Conical shaped. The mechanism, it becomes approximately flat when the pressure is applied. It keeps the clutch engaged. Spring fulcrum. Here, when clutch pedal is pressed, throughout bearing is pushed. Pressure plate pulled out. Friction surfaces are separated. Now, if I talk about some point of single plate clutch, a simplified sketch of single plate was discussed. Generally, friction plate is held between the flywheel and the pressure plate. So now let's discuss about the multi-plate clutch here. So this is also very important type of clutch, and generally multi-plate clutch is an extension of single plate type where the number of frictional and the metal plates is increased. The increase in the number of friction surfaces obviously increases the capacity of clutch to transmit torque. The size remaining fixed, alternatively the overall diameter of the clutch is reduced for the same torque transmission as a single plate clutch. In case of multiplate clutch, the type of clutch is therefore used in some heavier transport vehicles and racing cars where high torque is to be transmitted. Besides this, finds application in case of scooters and motorcycles where space available is limited. Now let's discuss about the semi-centrifugal clutch. Generally, for small torque transmission, the clutch springs may be designed so that they have sufficient strength for applying the required amount of force and at the same time are not too stiff as to cause any strain to the driver while disengaging. However, the high-powered engines, the clutch spring pressure required may be considerable and thus the action of disengaging the clutch become fatigue to the driver. So this is showing the mechanism of semi-centrifugal clutch. The springs are eliminated. No clutch pedal is required. Here let's discuss about centrifugal clutch. In case of centrifugal clutch, in the fully centrifugal type of clutches, the springs are eliminated altogether and only the centrifugal force is used to apply the required pressure for keeping the clutch in the engaged position. The advantage of centrifugal clutch is that no separate clutch pedal is required. The clutch is operated automatically depending upon the engine speed. This means that the car can be stopped in gear without stalling the engine. Similarly, while starting, the driver can first select the gear, put the car into the gear, and simply press the accelerator pedal. This makes the driving operation very easy. So, in today's lecture, we have discussed the types of the clutches and the need of the clutches by classifying various types of clutches. Thank you so much.